Hello, my name's Clifton Church. We haven't been formally introduced. I'm going to hold off until next week's video to do that part. It's just I feel that for the platform of YouTube, it is better to put the product out first and then talk about me as yada yada yada. So, that's my plan. For today then, I would like to talk about the major causes of the video game crash of 1983 and how they compare with the current video game market and why that matters. To do that, let's start at the very beginning. With that, we're starting at the first wave of video games. The first commercially available game was Pong. You can check out Tennis for Two and Space War for earlier existences of games, but the first one that was actually sold as something to a consumer was Pong, and that was released in 1972. Now, Wikipedia, if you care to look it up, will officially state that November 29th was the date of the official release, but from at least lived experience, it feels like the video game industry didn't exactly care about these dates until at least the mid-90s. So anything before that, I take those exact dates with a grain of salt, and I'll just leave it at that. But by the end of the 1970s, there were no less than half a dozen game consoles across two different hardware generations. The first official third-party publisher was founded in 1979, and that was Activision, with another memorable name, Electronic Arts, being founded in 1982, right in this early gold rush day of video games. The story behind those two guys opening is honestly very interesting. I might delve into that at some other point. But for now, just know that these guys were the OG when it comes to third-party game developers and the industry as a whole. Because hey, it helps to have that reference. But along with that gold rush feeling came some very aggressive competition. Armchair programmers threw their hats into the ring, creating low-budget, moderate return games, and often these budget games would get the attention of the bigger organizations that were looking to hire as much fresh meat as they could so that they could fulfill their need for code monkeys. The bigger corporatized groups were flooding the market with games of ranging quality. Sure, some were hits, Pitfall, Adventure, other games that I'm not going to be able to come up with because even still this is about a decade before my birth, so I really didn't have the personal experience of these games, but I have gone back, taken the time to read up on it. Yes, there were great hits during that time, but there were just as many, if not more, mediocre gameplay experiences. From early on, there's always been this difference between the consumable games and the games that have actually stood the test of time. And I think the difference there is how much care is put into actually engineering the whole thing to be... You know what? I don't even need to go into that. It seems that the games that have stood the test of time sort of start leaning towards things that you could look for art. And that's another idea that I would love to go into more detail on because I think there's a bigger conversation there between consumable games and art. But again, that's not for now. That's for later. For now, in the corporatized game companies, the pressure to get games out as quickly as possible was immense. These were the days where most games were made, code, art, and music, by a single developer. And doing that right, even on such a simple machine, using the tools available at the time, should take the better part of a year, considering everything. Some of the games that were coming out, though, in this time were being pushed out in months. One of the most notable references is E.T. for the Atari 2600 as a well-documented case for where the development time for the game was only 5.5 weeks so that they can meet the deadline of the December 1982 holiday shopping season. It's a shame how little things have changed, isn't it? Then again, this is not a video that's trying to get deeper into that. I'm trying to just look at the bigger overarching structure of what was going on. When you start looking at it, what does the bigger picture look like? Well, there's this rush of development, along with already varying quality, even from the reliable sources. This oversaturation of clones and knockoffs, on top of everything else, just wore down consumer confidence in the industry to the point where video games were all but dead in the crash of 1983. There was no popular support from the people as a whole. There were still those people who were, the enthusiasts, still absolutely into it, into the niche. You might want to look into sort of the point that VR is at, sort of looking at like a abandoned niche that's just waiting for something to turn around. That's another good parallel to sort of that dead zone between the crash of 83 and what happens next. In all honesty, I would respect anybody who would like to question why I established these as the points on which to blame the video game crash. It's a bold statement to make without at least some level of evidence. I have only given you, anecdotal evidence at this point, and that's not enough to establish a true point to work off of. I think the best defense for my perspective would be to look at what Nintendo did when they released the Nintendo Entertainment System in the United States, at least in a couple of markets, in 1985, 2 years after the crash had happened. Nintendo knew they were going to have an uphill battle for system adoption of their Famicom system in the United States after that video game crash fiasco. The first part of that plan was to design the American NES to more closely resemble modern VHS players of the time, with a front-loading design instead of a top-loading design. I actually have a VCR here, because I'm old and weird and have technology easily at hand. VCR, front loader. NES, front loader. Okay, the second part of Nintendo's plan was in direct response to the 3 points I made as a reason for the crash in the first place. Nintendo decided to establish the Nintendo Seal of Quality. Boom. God, I don't even want to animate that. This seal of quality was given to games that Nintendo staff had reviewed to assure a bare minimum level of acceptable gameplay. Publishers would also be limited to releasing only 5 games a year, and Nintendo would have the last word on the number of copies printed of each game. That was important because at the time we were still putting games on cartridges, being held on chips. The chips were expensive. In fact, I believe at the time, if I remember correctly, there was a chip shortage, which made it even more complicated for Nintendo to make sure that they could get out as many games as they wanted, which is another reason why they were so picky about making sure the games were good quality before sending them out to customers. Hi, Manny. You looking for attention? Okay. Along with their seal of quality, they also developed a lockout chip, which would prevent games that did not have this chip, and therefore were not Nintendo approved, from playing on their console by repeatedly rebooting the console itself. It was a quick workaround, but it worked. At least until people realized all they had to do was cut off a leg of a chip on the motherboard of the game console. Then the workaround was found, and, history's history. But these actions would help encourage publishers to only come to Nintendo with their best games for approval each year, allowing games that needed more time to cook just that. Time. By testing for bare minimum gameplay and not allowing games they didn't approve to run, they helped keep the game quality floor above where it had been leading up to the crash. Finally, these, along with controlling the number of games available in the market, helped prevent the market from getting overly flooded to the point of consumer exhaustion. As such, I feel confident in using these as indicators for future issues is reasonably justified. From the release of the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1985, up through about the year 2000, this was the model that most successful game console makers used to keep the right amount of interest going in their moneymakers. But anyone with a decent sense of how technology evolved knows what's going to take over in the early 2000s. That's right, the internet. The first games console that was able to fully leverage the rise of the internet was the Microsoft Xbox. It was the first console to contain significant storage built in, with an impressive 8 gigabytes. Oh, okay. So you couldn't even store your modern Call of Duty game on its spinning disk hard drive. But you have to think about it in reference to where we were at. You're going from a PlayStation 2 8 megabyte memory card to a hard disk with 1,000 times that space. That's significant. But it also meant that the console's operating system could be updated. And it was about a year after release, with the ability to play games online through the Xbox Live service. Yeah. There was also a small marketplace for digital games, but it was limited to about 30 games total for the original Xbox. And it mostly included either arcade ports or stuff like Bejeweled. Yeah, the budget games. We weren't downloading full AAA games yet or questioning what owning a game actually meant. But the groundwork was there. And that groundwork meant that developers could update games after they release, with the updates being saved on the user's hard drive to modify the disc game on the fly. It was a great tool for developers, allowing them not only to fix bugs they may have missed during QA, but adding new content easily for console players, a feature that PC was accomplishing with reasonable success around the time. It's unfortunate that any tool that is designed for good can be manipulated for worse. And anyone who's been watching the video game industry over the last decade, at least the last decade, can see where this tool for developers has become abused and warped to serve other interests. I have formed my perspective based on following the industry as a concerned consumer, and it feels that QA, quality assurance time, has been dwindling on game releases, with way too many games getting a day one patch to cover up the most glaring of bugs they were willing to ship the game with. But consider that. If they didn't have that day one patch ready, the publisher still will have sold you the game in an even worse condition than it is the first time you actually got to play it. And on top of that, the desire for yearly releases of some major franchises, Call of Duty, Madden, probably Football Manager. I don't know, I'm American. The reasonable kind. Anyway, those yearly releases require multiple development teams. And even still, they have buggy releases at times. Even with multiple teams doing multi-year development, the yearly feature creep and expected game modes have bloated these projects to the point of being underprepared for release. Now, I admit, I am placing a lot of fault so far on the publishers in current times. Even still, there's blame enough for the console platforms as well. All of these consoles, and PCs for that matter, have developed their own online stores to download games, having a substantial, wide variety of content to consume has been seen as optimal. Best to have everything for everyone seems to be the modus operandi for these platform owners. And while that does have its advantages, it does open the floodgates to smaller developers who may or may not have done the bare minimum to deserve that spot in the marketplace. And either way, it's going to take marketing space from confirmed better, or at least more developed, games that the average consumer is more likely to enjoy. It makes it hard for consumers to find the good games on your storefront, which has the opportunity to dissuade customers from making a purchase at all. Choice paralysis and such. If you've been paying attention up to this point, and I'd like to hope you have, you're likely to see where I'm going from here. From my perspective, the same causes of the video game crash in 1983, the lower overall quality of games coming out from the industry, the lack of adequate development time allowed for developers to create a cohesive gameplay experience, and the flooded marketplace are all rearing their ugly heads again in the current day. Fortunately, the climate in which we see this possible second crash is significantly different from the last. Video games have become more than just the toys they were seen as in the 70s and early 80s, to something that, at times, can be seen as something with artistic vision, with the intention to make the participant feel or think about something, in the same way good television makes you feel, or a movie can make you think about things from a different perspective. Unfortunately, my undiagnosed ADHD is preventing me from going any further into this topic at the moment. As I mentioned at the top, I do intend to upload a video more about myself next week. What I'm trying to do here and why I think that this is the time I want to move in on the industry of YouTuber, content creator. It's likely to be an exploration of other internet do it yourselfers, the algorithm, a little bit TikTok, and my midlife crisis. So, I guess you have that to look forward to. From there, I can explore the idea of what would the industry look like if we are on the cusp of a true video game crash? Or I have other ideas that I intend to lay out during next week's video just as, teasers. But in all honesty, I would like to thank anyone who is still here listening, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you all next week as I establish what I have to offer. With that being considered, do all the traditional YouTube things a traditional YouTuber asks you to do. Yeah. Oh, what are these? Like, comment, subscribe. There's a bell that even I've never used, but if it helps you, then please, by all means. I would love to have some conversation with you guys about if you think I have any good ideas here. I would like to hear what you might like to hear from me with my perspective of my personal history and what I might be able to see using patterns that I have witnessed throughout my life. I don't know what I'm necessarily doing here, but I think I've got enough good ideas and enough insight that there's value. And I hope you guys feel the same way. I mean, honestly, we're all out here trying to survive, I mean, I just have bye as my exit on my actual script. I've already gone off script like 3 or 4 times, at least. Anyway, peace and love to you and yours. Hope you have a good day, and I look forward to seeing you the next time. Bye.